Hey everyone, welcome back to the What Did They Know podcast. Nick was out of town this past weekend watching the Jets get their first win live and in person. So this week we have a mini episode for you. The guys are still going to give their takeaways from week 2, along with their power rankings, week 3 picks, and what they have their eye on for your fantasy lineup heading into week 3. But hey, what did they know?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to a slightly different version of the What Do They Know podcast for week 2. For those of you who may have listened last week, obviously you know that I was in Nashville over the weekend. Took my wife, we celebrated her birthday, and then my parents met us out there, and we ended up going to the Jets and Titans game, which was a lot of fun. Jets barely squeaked out the W. They got a lot of work to do, but I'm not gonna talk too much on them. But obviously, nonetheless, because of that, Jeff and I were not together to record our usual in-person broadcast, but we wanted to make sure and get something out to you. So I'll kind of share some thoughts that I have from this week, and then I'll let Jeff share his stuff. We'll go over same sort of thing, top stories, power rankings, and then from a fantasy perspective, our new segment that we call Fantasy Bolo, just something kind of look out for. So I'll kick it off with my top story, which is going to be Tua Tagovailoa, Miami Dolphins quarterback. Obviously, big story over the weekend. They played Thursday night at the Bills at the Dolphins, and Tua went out late in the fourth quarter with another scary-looking concussion. Had his arms kind of very stiff. I think they refer to it as posturing, which my understanding is when you see somebody's limbs do that, it means they lost consciousness. So that's the third time that we've seen that from Tua, 2 of them being that whole, stiff, limbs, fingers thing, just a really scary deal. And so, obviously now the big topic is what is Tua going to do? Do the Dolphins even let him come back and play? It's tough, right? Because nobody can choose what somebody does for their life, for their family, for their finances. Obviously, if he were to step away, that would be a big thing financially. Giving up close to, I think, $200 million left on his brand new contract. So, what should he do? What can he do? The big question is, right, do the Dolphins save him from himself? Because, reports were already out on Sunday, only a few days after that Tua has no plans to retire. So, that's kind of your answer. I think that, he needs to be out for an extended period of time. In my personal opinion, I'm not a doctor, but that's my opinion. Ryan Clark, ESPN analyst, shared a really interesting story Friday morning that I heard on the radio with his time in Pittsburgh. I don't know what the situation was, but he had some sort of medical situation where Pittsburgh was going to go play at Denver, and something very, very significant could happen to him, to the point where he said he had a whole team that if this injury happened and he could potentially die, they were going to be there and ready for him if something were to happen. And he said that he had a meeting with, the owners, the GM, the head coach Mike Tomlin, his wife, who he said was fully on board because she knew that what playing the game meant to him, and his team that he had assembled to be ready to basically revive him or try and take care of him or something. Again, I don't know what the injury was. He didn't go into detail about that, but he said that they were all kind of gathered around the table, so to speak. And finally, Mike Tomlin looked at him and said, what the F are we doing here? What are we talking about? And he said, if you were my son, this wouldn't be a conversation. You wouldn't be playing. So I don't know why we're having this conversation with you. And Ryan Clark said that was the end of it, right? They said okay, and he didn't end up playing. And he said he felt relieved, not because he didn't want to play, but because somebody took the decision kind of out of his hands. And I really feel like that's something that Miami needs to do. Even if it's for the rest of the year, you say, okay, you're done for the year. Go get some tests done. Go talk to doctors. Go get your mind right, so to speak. I think that's what needs to happen for Tua. So obviously a really tough situation for him, tough situation for his family, for the Dolphins. And I'll be really curious to see what happens going forward. Other games that caught my eye. was the Vikings over the Niners. That was a big surprise to me. I think that, if the Vikings, they're now 2-0, Sam Darnold looked great. He had a 97-yard touchdown to Justin Jefferson. I think that if the Vikings continue to play at this level and Sam Darnold continues to play at this level, we really need to start talking about Kevin O'Connell being one of the best coaches in the league. Just, what he did last year after Cousins tore his Achilles. They put in, I think, 3 or 4 different quarterbacks for the remainder of the season, and still were a competent team. They weren't a dumpster fire by any means. And now if you have Sam Darnold in there, who has been a journeyman, he's been on 3 or 4 different teams, and he's starting a season 2-0. If he continues to play like that, I think that you really need to have conversations about Kevin O'Connell and what a phenomenal coach he is. So that game really caught my eye. I was really surprised by that result. Same thing with the Ravens and the Raiders. Obviously, the Raiders had a nice comeback victory and beat the Ravens. Ravens are now 0-2. So that really, really surprised me. I was happy for the Raiders. For those of you who watched our I think it was our first episode, our AFC West breakdown, I predicted that the Raiders were going to finish second in the division. And so when they lost to the Chargers week 1, I was a little nervous about that. But to see them come back and have this nice victory over a team that a lot of people think could be in the Super Bowl this year was nice to see from them. I'll be curious to see how both teams kind of piggyback off that, right? Do the Raiders, was it a fluke? Do the Raiders continue that momentum and finish out the year or continue to play strong throughout the rest of the year? And the Ravens are now 0-2, which for my money, it's the most surprising 0-2 team. What are they going to look like next week? What are they going to look like through the rest of the season? Obviously, the Chiefs game, both games were 1-possession games, right? So kind of tough to say that they are getting blown out because they're not playing the way they should be, because they are. That's 1-possession games, but at the same time, good teams win close games, and the Ravens haven't done that yet. So I'll be really, really curious to see how the Ravens rebound and what they look like going forward. I feel like Derrick Henry really has not had as much of a role as maybe a lot of us expected, especially in Kansas City, in the Kansas City game. Obviously, he had that early touchdown, but really was a non-factor kind of after that. And then, didn't really light the world on fire with his box score this week either. So, curious to see if they kind of shift some things from their offense perspective and throw more of a workload his way. But that game really caught my eye. And then, the last one that selfishly I was really, really pleased with was the Cardinals over the Rams. The Cardinals just ran away with the game within the first quarter. It was 21-0. Obviously, the big story was getting Marvin Harrison Jr. In the mix. They did not do that. Week 1, he only had 3 targets with 1 catch, and he had 2 touchdowns in the first quarter. So I think he finished with 130 yards, 4 catches, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns. But I mean, more so than just him, the Cardinals looked amazing. Kyler Murray finished the game with a perfect passer rating, 158.3. He just looked completely in control. The Rams just beat the brakes off the Rams. There's no other way to put it. They ran the ball down their throat. James Conner looked phenomenal. Kyler Murray looked phenomenal. And I'm really, really starting to kick myself. And I know Jeff probably feels the same way, that we did not put them in the playoffs, because again, it's only 2 weeks. They're 1-1, but you can make an argument they should be 2-0. They had a 14-point lead over the Bills, and obviously let week 1 slip away, but now they're 1-1, and they have a really intriguing matchup against the Lions next week that I'll get into a little bit later, but really curious to see how they play against the Lions and if they're able to build off of that. But I think, I said it before, that the Cardinals are going to be in every game, and I think they're going to be a fringe playoff team. I really do. Jeff and I were both high on them to begin the season. I know my dad, who listens to this show and lives in Phoenix, is really high on the Cardinals as well. And so really happy to see them perform well against a team that, honestly, if you know anything about the Cardinals, they always play terrible against the Rams, but more specifically, Kyler Murray always plays terrible against the Rams. You can think about that playoff game a few years ago where the Rams just gave it to them, just completely handled them. And that wasn't the case yesterday or Sunday. So really, really excited about that. So those were some of my big takeaways from this week. Obviously, there were a bunch of really interesting matchups, or not only matchups, but results. So I'll go ahead and dive into my power rankings. I already listened to Jeff's, very similar to Jeff's. Number one, I have the Chiefs. Obviously, I know they narrowly escaped with a last-second field goal over the Bengals. I honestly thought that game would not be as close as it was. I thought the Chiefs were going to kind of, blow them out, honestly, but they were my lock for this week, so I escaped barely. But the Bengals are a team that always play them tough. So, nonetheless, they escaped with the win. They're 2-0. For those of you who say that they get every call, I mean, if you're honest with yourself, that was pass interference on that last second play, that fourth down play that put them in field goal range. You can't deny it. That was pass interference. The guy got there at least a second early. So I get that that's an easy thing to say for Chiefs haters. Oh, they get every call. That wasn't pass interference. But if you're honest, football, that was pass interference. So it is what it is. Good teams make plays at the end when they need to. And you can, debate about how they made the plays, but at the end of the day, Chiefs got it done. They're 2-0. And I think they've played two really good games. So I have them number one. Number two, the Saints. I know that I'm not going to steal Jeff's thunder. I know he's going to talk about the Saints. I am blown away by them. They literally have not punted in 2 games. They've scored on every single possession, which is just incredible. So they're 2-0. They're my number 2 team. I really thought about putting them number 1, but they got a tough one against Philadelphia this coming week. And if they win that, I think that that's a no-brainer that they'll be number 1 in my power ranking. So number 2, I got the Saints. Number 3, I got the Bills. I'm already ready to kind of eat my words. I have no problem admitting when I'm wrong, and even though it's only been 2 weeks, I think it's safe to say that Jeff and I were both wrong about the Bills. We both had them missing the playoffs this year, and now I really, especially with Tua and the injury to his injury, I really don't think that Miami's going to make the playoffs, and obviously that means that the Bills more than likely will. But even injury aside, the Bills dominated that game even before the injury. So I think I'm already okay with saying that I got it wrong about the Bills, and that's okay. Again, I'm not a Bills hater. We live in upstate New York, so it's fun when they're good and competitive. So I think that they're going to be a really good team throughout the whole year. So I have them at number 3. Number 4. Arguably one of the biggest surprises is Tampa Bay. Not the fact that they're good, but just how good they look and how good Baker Mayfield looks. He, I think, already is in MVP conversations for how well he's playing. Tampa just looks in control of what they're doing on the offensive end, so I have them at number 4. And then rounding out the top 5, I kind of, hemmed and hawed. There's a couple other 2-0 teams, but I put the Texans here at number 5. 2 good wins. Chicago has a really good defense, so even though, on Sunday Night Football, they didn't score a ton of points. I think Houston scored 19 total points on Sunday. That's a really good defense that they're playing. So C.J. Stroud looks really, really good. My only question now going forward with them is, Joe Mixon had an injury. So what does that look like for them in their run game? He was a big part of their offense in week 1, not as much in week 2, and the injury had a lot to do with that. But curious to see how he, what his status is and how they look going forward. But Texans at number 5, rounding out my top 5 power rankings. So I'm going to dive into my picks. So just kind of recap last week. So I went 2-0. I picked the Chiefs over the Bengals as my lock, and my upset was Tampa Bay over Detroit. So I was 2-0 that week, last week, and then Jeff ended up going 1-1. What game did he get wrong? He got the Raiders. He picked the Ravens over the Raiders as his lock. So he missed one. He went 1-1. So I got Jeff by a game right now. So I'm hoping to continue that. So my lock this week is going to be the Seattle Seahawks over the Dolphins. I just think that, coming off a traumatic injury to Tua, backup quarterback, they're going west. Teams always seem to struggle when they got to go all the way up to Seattle. And then the Seahawks were 2-0. They're no slouch, so they've played 2 good games. They went to New England this week and knocked them off, so I have the Seahawks over the Dolphins. And then my upset, I'm going to run it back with my week 1 pick. I got the Cardinals over the Lions. Lions are 3-point favorites right now, so I got the Cardinals. I think that this game is in Arizona. Lions are not struggling, but they did lose this week to Tampa Bay. They just don't look as explosive as they did last year, so I'll be curious to see how they look. Sam Laporta has not been his usual self, so I got the Cardinals over the Lions as my upset. And then my fantasy bolo, real quick, is not necessarily something specific, but just the amount of injuries that we had in week 2. And just that this week of all weeks is a time I feel like you need to be really aggressive on the waiver wire. I just throw out some names that are currently injured: AJ Brown, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Isaiah Pacheco, Justin Jefferson, Joe Mixon. Obviously those first 3, AJ Brown, Puka, Cooper Kupp, and even actually Isaiah Pacheco, those are all extended amount of time injuries. I almost guarantee if you have a good team, you've drafted one of those guys. So you really need to dive into the waiver wire and see if maybe you can pick up one of their backups, or the receiver situation for the Rams is really curious because their top 2 guys are out. So we got to see who's going to take over those spots. And then Justin Jefferson might play, Joe Mixon might play, but again, if they don't, what are you going to do? So I think you really need to hit the waiver wire hard and make sure that you can fill those spots if they end up continuing to miss time. So that's what I would do for your fantasy team to get yourself ready for week 3. Those are my takeaways, my power rankings, my picks. So hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll kick it over to Jeff to round out his takeaways and power rankings and picks and all that. So we will be back together for week 3. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll talk to you later.
Hey everyone, Jeff here. Here to give you my thoughts on week 2 of the NFL season. Obviously, with Nick being in Tennessee and me working nights, we can't really get together during the weekdays. So we'll keep it short and sweet. For me personally, I could go on an entire segment about the Saints. Obviously, they've looked phenomenal, but I'll spare you guys that entire spiel. Obviously, I'm recording here on Tuesday morning. So news is already broken down that Bryce Young is being benched in favor of Andy Dalton. To me, that's just I feel like that's not a Dave Canales decision there. I feel like that might have come up from a higher above him, because he just signed a 6-year deal there to be the head coach for Carolina. And 2 games into your tenure there, you're already pulling the plug on your quarterback that you just spent the first overall pick last year on. I feel like that's not his call, and that's unfortunate, because that's all of a sudden you're putting pressure on Dave Canales in 2 games into his tenure. That's not a dream scenario for a head coach there, especially a first time head coach. Obviously, for Bryce Young, you can call him a bust now, but to me, it's yes, he has to take accountability, and a lot of these things are on his plate. He hasn't really shown growth, athleticism wise. You would have hoped some of his skills that he had at Ohio State would have translated over to the NFL. However, it's just not, his arm strength is not there. His decision making hasn't been progressive. There's just a lot of things for Bryce Young personally that haven't looked good. Obviously, I understand moving, I guess, a little bit beyond Bryce Young, but you're 2 games into the season. You can't move away from the young guy this quick. To me, I don't know how he comes back from this. His confidence has to be shot, and it has to get rebuilt. How? I just don't see it there in Carolina anymore. There's just no way that even further down the season that you bring back Bryce and be like, all right, lead us to the promised land again. It's just not a great situation for either Carolina or for Bryce Young at this point. So to me, Bryce Young was obviously never around a talented team there in Carolina. So there's definitely a lot of blame to go around the front office there. But Bryce Young definitely didn't do himself any favors. It's just going to be one of those things where he's definitely going to need a fresh start somewhere else. Where, I don't know where that's going to be, but I feel like his time in Carolina is not going to be long, and it's not going to be bright. So moving on from there, Kirk Cousins obviously led a touchdown drive, winning drive for Atlanta over Philadelphia. Big play call there was Nick Sirianni to call a pass play to Saquon instead of just running the ball and lowering the time and kicking the field goal. And we always debate about this, about how it, like, you'll take all the credit and how much gutso you got if it works out. However, you get all the blame if it doesn't. So this is just one of those scenarios for Nick Sirianni. Obviously, he knows what he's doing. He's a good head coach. It just didn't work out for him this time. And Kirk Cousins, leading that game-winning drive. Obviously, that's impressive. He looked a lot more comfortable with that Achilles coming off that injury. So for me, step in the right direction for Atlanta. For Philadelphia, obviously, it's a tough loss to swallow. However, to me, it's just one of those games where you just live and die by that play call by your head coach. You take the ugly with the good and the good and the ugly. Obviously, Nick Sirianni's had a lot more good than ugly. So to me, it's going to be a hard one to swallow, but you move on with it and you get ready for New Orleans next week. And that brings me on to story number 3, which is New Orleans. Obviously, I'm not going to talk too much about it because it's I can go 10, 20 minutes on New Orleans offense. Obviously, the biggest upgrade they've had was their offense coordinator. I talked about it all during our NFC South previews. Clinton Kubiak has proven to be a mastermind on the offensive play calling. He's schemed. His scheme is just phenomenal right now. Obviously, my biggest concern was the offensive line. But so far, he's even Clint Kubiak sees that as a weakness, and so he's helped chip with tight ends, running backs, just giving the offensive line as much help as possible, especially against the Dallas Cowboys defensive line with Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence and the rest of those guys there. To shred that defense as well as they did, that was quite impressive. Obviously, I didn't foresee that. Obviously, I came into the season low hopes, low expectations, and just let the season play out as it should. So because this is the Saints team that I imagined last year, to be honest with you. Just picking apart teams, they obviously have the talent there with Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Kamara looking like a pre-COVID Alvin Kamara. It's a beautiful sight to see. Obviously, I knew they had this in them. It's just, it goes to show how good a coordinator calling the plays, how valuable that actually is. So Clint Kubiak, honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if he's already getting head coaching considerations somewhere else, internally somewhere. So, but moving on from there, I'll move on to power rankings just really quick. Number 1, I got the Chiefs. Obviously, they won a nail biter there over Cincinnati. Obviously, you can say whatever you want about the flag, the defensive PI against Cincinnati, and the Chiefs always find a way, or the NFL always finds a way for the Chiefs to get it done. But at the end of the day, the Chiefs still have the talent there to win close games, and they have the experience there. It's a good team that they have over there. Number 2, I got the Saints. Honestly, the Saints have looked the most impressive in the NFL, and maybe I'm getting a little bit too hopeful for the season at this point. Obviously, they have a tough matchup next week against Philadelphia, who are coming off that loss, like I said. But yeah, at number 2, I got the Saints. Their offense looks potent. Their defense is looked very manageable. Obviously, they held Carolina to 10 points, backing the Cowboys to 19. A lot of field goals, not a lot of touchdowns. So it's a bend don't break, and they're causing turnovers and sacks. So there's not much I can ask for that defense. At 3, I got Tampa Bay, the Buccaneers. Obviously, they had an impressive win over the Lions. Baker Mayfield just continues to prove that he's a solid quarterback to build around. To me, Chris Godwin is probably one of the most underrated wide receiver 2s in the NFL. It's definitely a good team they have over there in Tampa. Number 4, I got the Bills. I mean, they've been impressive. I mean, I guess it's hard to say, but maybe they had an addition by subtraction. I mean, Nick and I talked about it all the time about Stephon Diggs. I mean, obviously Stephon Diggs is a huge talent, but obviously when you're not force feeding Stephon, obviously everyone becomes equally as dangerous now. The tight ends, Kincaid, Knox, your receivers now, you don't know who to defend, and now they're more of a running team, which I feel like they should have been a running team years prior, but with the running back now with Josh Allen. Obviously, this past week, Josh Allen only had 2 attempts for 2 yards, so that to me, I wouldn't even look at the yards. I'd just look at the attempts. To me, that's phenomenal. That's the best direction I feel like the Bills should go, and that's with James Cook. So nothing but positives there against Miami. And then number 5, obviously, there's quite a few 2-0 teams, but I went with the Vikings on this one because they've looked impressive. Sam Darnold is kind of looked resurrected there in Minnesota. He could be this year's Baker Mayfield, to be honest with you. You finally have the opportunity and finally find a home and have the talent around you that you need to succeed. Obviously against the 49ers that are a little bit banged up. Christian McCaffrey obviously was out, and he's, I believe, on IR now. Debo got injured, so he'll be out for a little bit. But Minnesota, 2 impressive wins so far in the season, which will lead us to week 3, our picks. Right now I got my lock. It's the Browns over the Giants. Obviously the Browns haven't looked impressive offensively at all. However, I feel like the Giants are too mistake prone on offense, and the Browns defense will capitalize on that pretty well. I mean, if there's a get right game for the Browns, it should definitely be this one. As for my upset, I got the Chargers over the Steelers. It's a couple 2-0 teams. Right now, the Steelers are favored by 2 points. They're playing in Pittsburgh. The Steelers haven't really looked, I guess, too impressive with Justin Fields, but I mean, like we were talking about, he's being more of a game manager right now. It's definitely a little different, I guess, look for Pittsburgh offense, but for the Chargers, they've looked quite formidable. Revamped almost over there. They're 2-0, obviously. I feel like their defense is sneaky good. They held Carolina to 3 points. To me, it's just one of those things where this can be a toss-up, but I feel like the Chargers have more going for them right now than the Steelers, so that'll be my upset. And then as for my fantasy bolo, right now, I'm looking at Cincinnati. Their running backs, Zach Moss, Chase Brown, they didn't do a whole lot against Kansas City. Zach Moss had 12 attempts for 34 yards, and then Chase Brown had 4 attempts for 31 yards. Zach Moss only had 1 reception for 13 yards, but only had the 1 target. Right now, it's kind of been a little bit disappointing in terms of running back production there in Cincinnati. But I mean, the next 4 opponents, they're playing Washington, at Carolina. They have a little bit of a tough win there in Baltimore, and then they're at the Giants. So to me, this stretch of 4 games is going to dictate who's going to be the lead back. I feel like the rest of the season for Cincinnati. Obviously, right now it's kind of a toss up between Zach Moss and Chase Brown. I feel like Zach Moss has the upper edge right now, just for experience and I guess being the veteran there. Chase Brown is I'm not sure. I believe he's a rookie, but I'm not sure on that one. But yeah, if whoever gets the hot hand during these 4 weeks, though, that's the running back that you should be considering in your flex position down the rest of the season. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll see where that goes. But yeah, that's it for me. I see a lot of upsets, a lot of good games this past weekend. Obviously, I'm a happy camper, so I can't complain. But yeah, thanks.
Thanks for listening to What Did They Know podcast. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media outlets to see future episode details, and don't forget to send in any questions or topics that you want to see the guys discuss in their weekly episodes to come.